Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I do hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I am an author, and I'm coming to you here on another Writing Wednesday to talk some about how I craft and develop action scenes and action in general in my books. Um, I'd say this is one, like action scenes, action sequences, is one that I really, in particular, put a lot of. I really try to put a lot of thought and effort into um, of making it as realistic as possible. Yes, I'm writing in the fantasy genre, and there's magic, but even that, you know, trying to have it a set rules of what different spells and abilities and things do with regards to magic and how it would practically function, um, as well as and that as well as like the physical movements. That's something I have always found distracting in books that I've read, is where just like it may be gripping and exciting in some ways, but like especially if you like read it again or look at it, like just the movements don't make a ton of sense, or like you know weapons appear and disappear, and or conveniently picked up or dropped or whatever, depending upon the situation. So I really look for trying to make those as realistic as possible for like physical actions, individual, like a sword fight or a small group of people fighting. I really try to look through and imagine, or think through and imagine, like each step of the way. Like, okay, so this person stabs. Okay, to catch their wrist. Okay, that would be their left arm would catch the wrist and twist the knife out of it, while the right arm comes in with a punch, you know and sort of play it out in my head. Sometimes even physically thinking about like okay, if I'm the character from whose point of view this is being told, what would that look like? What would my movement opportunities be? Just to try to keep that as realistic as possible, and believable as possible. Um, Obviously, so sometimes you know, I don't always describe, and I don't think it's necessary to describe every little action. But so sort of describing it in broad details is perfectly helpful. Like uh, their opponent advanced on them with a stab that turned into a slash, and whirled around and brought the sword, tried to bring the sword down on their head, or whatever the situation may be, which they just barely managed to parry and then dodge out of the way of, and then roll out of the way of. I'm not, you know I think it's I personally think with action scenes it's a give or take. You need to have some realism, some details of what movement is possible, particularly if there's a tense moment or a tight, you know, grappling or a key moment on the fight, but also like describing that in too much tedious detail takes things away from the imagination of your reader. So I like to keep things, at points a little bit broad for the same reason. I do the same thing with larger sort of battle and action sequences, sort of think through less particular movements, but more, drawing on some of my knowledge and history, plus doing some, research as needed online of okay, what are, these two groups that are fighting, whether they be, two groups of people or two companies or two armies or whatever the size may be, okay, how cohesive would they be? How would this particular, based on the culture and setup I've given them, how would they be, you know how are they armed, how are they armored, how would they fight, how would they be trained, would they fighting close formation? Would they fight sort of piecemeal? Would it be a big charge? Would it be a defense? Like, and really thinking about that, and again thinking about sort of how that would play and interact together. And I try to bring in where like the advantages and disadvantages of certain weapons, and is arrows or magic involved, and what other things are affecting or impacting the battle, and then sort of describe. I mean, there's a certain, if you read actual accounts of battles, there's always a certain chaotic. I mean, history books tend to portray battles very technically, but if you've ever read a history or a diary that really records, what a battle's like for the actual soldiers and what it's like on the ground, it's messy and chaotic and uncertain a lot of the time. So try to, and that's kind of how I like to. I don't. I'm not a big, I'm not trying or going for the grim, exaggerated realism. I don't know what the right word for it would be, of something like George R. R. Martin's fantasy of just it's everything is bloody and brutal and bleak for everyone, but I think some realism and understanding of what war and battle and fighting is actually like is really helpful to bring into and paint into action sequences, to really engage with the engage the reader, engage whoever's experiencing that. And then same thing that brings it into magic. You know, Magic's relatively, not everyone has it, by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, magic being fairly ubiquitous in my world. Okay, what kind of, based on their species or culture or what have you, like how would they be trained to do magic? What kind of magic are they doing? You know, what are they looking for, going for, based on either the element they're like attuned to, and how much time and concentration is needed, what type of magic, and really sort of bringing that into like the combats as well, to sort of an idea of what that's going to look like, or how that's going to look at and play out. um yeah, and that's really just a brief overview of how I treat like action sequences that I want to. It's, yeah, I guess the best way to describe it, of how I like to treat and view action sequences or battle sequences or fights or whatever you want to call it, is I'm trying to achieve a combination of letting my readers like imagination engage with and imagine and give their own interpretations to things like that, while also including some grounding in realism, or again, in the case of magic, at least some sensible and consistent rules, to sort of, I feel like it helps my world and my writing to feel more approachable, realistic, lived in, whatever you want to call it. And I personally find that's a good balance. And the type of fantasy I want to write is, I want it to be more realistic, more like sensible than some of the, what you call the classic high fantasy genre, sword and sorcery type of stuff, but also not quite as you know grim and brutal, and keeping some of the fantasy and magic um, alive, unlike some more modern fantasies that have that have drifted more in the, like, yeah, hyper brutal realism, whatever you want to call it, type of thing. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy, well, I enjoy the first three books of Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones. I love Tolkien. I love Tolkien and a lot of the sword and sorcery and very idealistic worlds type of thing from Tolkien and his the many people that work on his copy. But I like to strike a balance somewhere in the middle, and I think one of the big areas I do that is action sequences. So, what are some of the things you like seeing in action sequences? Do you like them to be more fantastic and imaginative, more realistic? Do you have a particular author recommendation of someone who does that really well that I'd love to check out? I'm always looking for other information and examples. In the meantime, I would encourage you all to check out two books I have published. Their links are down below: The Shadow of the Past and The Sunburned Red. Um, and as well as check out my socials, my website, like, share, subscribe. All of that would be amazing. My name again is John. I do hope you have a wonderful day and get the opportunity to do or experience something creative. And I'll catch you on the next one.